I could feel the weight of the air in that room, stuffed with the usual buzz of family chatter, but all of it felt distant. Kathy's family, sitting around her parents' table, was talking, laughing, and carrying on, but it was like I wasn't even there. Maybe I was just too used to being overlooked at these things, but tonight it stung a little more than usual. Greg, Kathy's dad, was at the head of the table, his thick fingers wrapped around his wine glass like he had the world in his hands, which he pretty much did. He cleared his throat, and everyone fell quiet, except for me, of course. I took another sip of my beer, trying to keep myself small out of the spotlight. "So, Tom," Greg said, eyes narrowing slightly like he was about to teach me a lesson I didn't ask for. "I heard you've been pouring money into that little cabin of yours in the mountains. I think it's time you realized it's a bad investment. A place like that, it's just a money pit." I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the blood rushing to my face. I opened my mouth to say something, but Greg didn't even pause. "You've been wasting money," he went on, dismissive, like he was talking about a bad habit I couldn't shake. "If I were you, I'd take control of my finances, really. Get a handle on things." His tone was soft, but the underlying message hit me hard. Kathy, sitting beside me, didn't even look at me. "Dad's right, Tom. You're always talking about how the cabin is your sanctuary, but it doesn't really make sense, does it? We need to be more practical." I felt it. Every word was a slap in the face. I opened my mouth again, but what was the point? Nothing I said ever mattered. Not to her. Not to them. The table was silent for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I glanced around the room, noticing how everyone was avoiding eye contact, like they were waiting for me to just nod and agree. I tried to explain how the cabin was more than just a house. It was my escape, a place where I could breathe for once. But before I could even start, the phone in my pocket buzzed. It was an unknown number. Normally, I'd just ignore it, but something about it made me pause. I glanced at it, but Kathy's voice broke my focus. "Tom, don't make excuses," she said, the words so casual, like she was asking me to pass the potatoes. "You've got to be practical. You can't keep throwing money away." I nodded, but my insides felt like they were slowly unraveling. I looked down at my phone again, the buzz still fresh, and ignored it, trying to keep my anger from spilling over. It wasn't just the cabin. It was everything. The way they treated me, like I was always a step behind. Tonight was just the latest reminder. I tried to shake off the sting of that dinner, but it clung to me. The way Kathy had dismissed me, like I was a problem that could be easily fixed with a few harsh words. And Greg, his casual judgment was like an old wound I hadn't noticed bleeding until it was too late. It wasn't the first time they'd done this to me, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. But this time, it hurt more. I leaned back on the couch later that night, the room dark except for the glow of the TV and the light from the lamp over Kathy's shoulder. She was flipping through a magazine, her mind clearly somewhere else. I could feel the weight of years of their subtle digs piling on top of me. 10 years we'd been married. 10 years, and not once did I feel like I was really seen. I worked hard. Hell, I worked my ass off. But none of that seemed to matter. I got a promotion last year, a big one, and Kathy barely even acknowledged it. No, congratulations, no, I'm proud of you. Instead, she changed the subject to something mundane, like whether or not we should repaint the kitchen. I'd tried bringing it up once, tried to talk about how I felt like I was always the afterthought, but she just got quiet, pulled that face of hers, the one she uses when she's pretending to listen, but her mind is already on something else. I should have known better than to expect anything more than that. And then there was Greg. I remember the first time I met him. He looked at me like I wasn't even worth his time. The first few years were a tightrope walk around his criticisms. One time, he straight up told me I was lazy. No, weak. Because I didn't want to join his business venture. I had a job, a steady one, but to him, that wasn't enough. He always talked about his success, how he built his empire from nothing, like somehow I should have followed his path. It always felt like I was failing his invisible test, no matter what I did. Even when Kathy and I went away on vacations, there was this coldness between us. It wasn't just financial, it was emotional. The things they said, the way they looked at me, it felt like I wasn't ever quite good enough. I always thought it was just me being insecure, but the more I thought about it, the more it became clear that it wasn't me. It was them. That cabin I bought, it was supposed to be my escape, a place where I could finally breathe, away from the constant pressure to prove I was enough. The cabin was small, nothing fancy, but it was mine. For once, I didn't have to be anyone else's idea of success. I could just exist. But every time Kathy or her family brought it up, it felt like they were poking holes in it. Carla, Kathy's sister, especially. She would always laugh when we talked about the cabin. "You sure that's not a midlife crisis shack, Tom?" she'd say, her eyes dancing with mockery. She thought it was funny, but to me, it was another little reminder that I wasn't allowed to have something just for myself. At first, I tried to shrug it off, but every time they made fun of the cabin, every time Kathy turned her back on me to side with her family, I felt smaller, more isolated. I thought I could get through it. I thought, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. But the truth was, it was eating me alive. This feeling that no matter what I did, I wasn't allowed to have anything real. And then, after the dinner at her parents' house, I realized something. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the cabin. This was about control. They wanted me to feel like I couldn't have anything of my own. They wanted me to feel like I needed them to tell me what to do, like I couldn't stand on my own. I spent the night lying awake, the weight of it all pressing down on me. My thoughts tangled into a mess, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep letting them do this to me. I couldn't keep letting Kathy's family define who I was. My cabin, my small act of rebellion, was about to be taken from me. And that phone call from the lawyer earlier, it kept nagging at me. Something told me this was bigger than just some bad investment. There was something else going on, something that, once I figured it out, was going to change everything. The resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface was starting to boil over, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it contained. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Not again. I came home late that night, exhausted from the work trip, my head still spinning from a long day of meetings and presentations. The moment I walked in the door, Kathy was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She didn't even look up when I came in. "Hey," I said, trying to shake off the weight of the day. "How's it going?" "Good. Just wanted to talk to you about something," she said, still not meeting my eyes. I set my bag down, confused by the tone in her voice. "What's up?" She finally glanced at me, her face unreadable. "The cabin's been sold." My heart dropped. I stared at her, thinking I hadn't heard her right. "What? The cabin? It's sold." Greg thought it was a bad investment and, well, he convinced me it was time to let it go. I felt the blood drain from my face. The cabin? The one place I'd fought so hard to make mine? The one place I'd clung to for sanity? Gone? Just like that? "Wait, hold on. You sold it?" My voice was tight, barely above a whisper. She nodded. "Yeah, it's sold, Tom. Greg said it wasn't practical, and we needed to do something for the family's finances." She leaned forward, like she was trying to reason with me. "Look, it's for the greater good. The money from the sale will help us pay for some things around here. You know, bills, the car, things we've been putting off." Her words hit like a slap in the face. The greater good? What was she talking about? Our finances? I stared at her, and I could feel my chest tightening, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "I never even got a say in this," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. Kathy shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Tom, you were getting too attached to it. It was never practical. You knew that." I was getting too attached? I almost laughed, though it wasn't funny at all. That cabin was mine. I bought it, I worked for it, and you just sold it without even telling me? She sighed, like I was overreacting. "You just didn't understand, Tom. It wasn't a good investment. Greg thought it was a waste of money." I felt like I was suffocating. Every word she said twisted the knife a little deeper. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about everything, the constant feeling of being unseen, like I wasn't even part of the decisions that affected my own life. "I didn't think it was a waste," I said, barely holding it together. "That place was mine. It was the only thing I had that was just for me." She stood up, her eyes cold now. "Well, you were wrong. We needed to sell it. You needed to let go." I felt like I was standing in someone else's house. This wasn't my home anymore. This wasn't my life. I wasn't even allowed to have a damn cabin. Without saying another word, I grabbed my phone and stepped out of the room, needing space to breathe. My fingers trembled as I checked the screen. The unknown number was still in my recent calls. I tapped it, my heart pounding in my chest, as I waited for the call to connect. A lawyer's voice came through, urgent, frantic. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm calling about the sale of your property. There's something seriously wrong with the transaction. We've come across discrepancies in the paperwork. It appears there are forged signatures. My stomach dropped. What? Forged signatures? Yes, sir, the lawyer continued, his tone sharp. And potentially illegal activity. I need you to come in as soon as possible. We've already alerted the authorities. The words were a blur, but I understood what he was saying. Someone, Greg, I realized, had been messing with the paperwork. This wasn't just some business deal. This was something much bigger than I had ever imagined. I hung up and stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. My mind raced. The betrayal wasn't just financial anymore. It was personal. My own family, my wife, had just sold me out. I turned to head back into the kitchen, but I couldn't bring myself to go back in. Instead, I stood in the hallway, my hands clenched so tightly my nails were digging into my palms. I had to get to the bottom of this. I had to find out what was really going on. I spent the next few days trying to piece together what was happening, but it felt like every turn I took only led to deeper confusion. I couldn't trust anyone in Kathy's family, not even her. My gut told me they were all in on it, but I needed something concrete. So I hired Dave, a private investigator. He was rough around the edges, but that's exactly what I needed. I didn't want some polished suit who'd tiptoe around the truth. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to dig into the dirt. It didn't take long for him to start turning up red flags. The sale documents for the cabin, they were a mess. Dave's gut instinct was that something was off from the start. After looking through the paperwork, he told me straight out that my signature had been forged. It was clean, too clean, and that's what made it look suspicious. The real kicker? The lawyer who called me had noticed the same thing and had already reported it to the authorities. The more I heard, the more I wanted to throw up. I was in on this family, I thought. I trusted them, and now they were pulling the rug out from under me, one piece at a time. Dave's investigation didn't stop at the forged signatures. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about the cabin. This was a calculated move to strip me of whatever autonomy I had left. Greg, Kathy's father, had been using my financial information, checking accounts, credit reports, the whole thing, without my knowledge, without my consent. I'd always known they didn't think much of me, but I had no idea they saw me as this much of a sucker. The humiliation cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I was a grown man, but I felt like I'd been living under their thumb all these years, too blind to see it. They made me feel like I was failing on my own, when the reality was they were actively setting me up to fail. Dave's eyes narrowed when he found out more about Greg's involvement. He mentioned something about possible federal consequences, and it hit me like a freight train. What the hell had I gotten myself into? This wasn't just some stupid family argument anymore. This was fraud. This was theft. And it was all being orchestrated by the man who'd made it clear, over and over, that I was never going to be good enough for his daughter. I didn't know whether to go straight to the authorities or confront Kathy and Greg head on. Both options felt like poison. If I went legal, it would tear everything apart. Our family, my family. But if I confronted them, I wasn't sure I could trust what they'd say. The lies had already been spun so tight that it was hard to tell where one ended and another began. I tried to sleep, but it felt like the weight of everything was pressing down on my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Greg smirk, that smug look of superiority he always wore when I wasn't measuring up. And Kathy? I didn't know what to feel about her anymore. Was she a victim too? Or had she just been playing me all along? By the time Dave finished his report, I was barely holding it together. There was more than I ever expected. Greg hadn't just sold the cabin to get rid of a bad investment. No, this was part of something bigger. The cabin was just the tip of the iceberg. Greg had been skimming money from my accounts. I had never suspected a thing. All those small withdrawals, those transfers that seemed like mistakes, weren't mistakes. They were calculated, deliberate. The realization made my stomach churn. Greg had been embezzling from me, using my finances like they were his own personal piggy bank. And Kathy, was she in on this? She'd known enough to let it happen, enough to keep quiet while it all went down. I was lost in a fog of anger and disbelief. I didn't know what to do next. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life, was crumbling in front of me. My own family, my wife, had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even begun to understand. One thing was clear. I couldn't keep playing by their rules anymore. It was time to fight back, but I still didn't know how. Did I go to the cops, or did I tear into them personally? Either way, I was ready to make this right, whatever it took, because I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I told myself I wasn't going to lose it. I had a plan, and I was going to stick to it. But the moment I walked into that bar and saw Greg sitting at the far end, I could already feel my pulse picking up. The place was noisy, dim, with people talking too loud and glasses clinking, but all I could focus on was the man sitting there with his smug grin, like he was waiting for me to show up. It was like he knew this day was coming. He didn't even look surprised when I sat down across from him. His hands were wrapped around his beard like he had all the time in the world. I could barely contain the anger brewing in me. Every time I'd tried to make myself heard in this family, every time I'd tried to stand up, it had been shot down. But not this time. Not now. "So what's this about?" Greg asked, leaning back in his chair, the kind of relaxed posture that always made me feel small, like he was the king of the world, and I was just some peon bothering him with my petty problems. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about the cabin, the one you sold behind my back." Greg's laugh was short and dismissive. "Oh, that." He waved a hand like it wasn't a big deal. "Tom, come on. That cabin was a bad investment. You know it, I know it. I was just trying to help you see the bigger picture. You're too attached to things, too focused on sentimental junk." He took a sip of his beer, eyes glinting like he was enjoying this. "No, Greg," I said, leaning in, my voice low but sharp. "This isn't about the cabin. This is about everything else. The way you've been using my financial information. The way you've been siphoning money from my accounts for years. You think I don't know? You think I haven't noticed?" For the first time, Greg's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, like a snake shaking off the skin. "What are you talking about? You're overreacting, Tom. We did this for the family's best interest. You just can't see it." He was still trying to play it cool, but there was a tension in his voice now, a crack in the facade. "I can see it," I spat, the words coming out before I could stop them. "What I see is you using me as a cash cow. What I see is you treating me like I'm not good enough, never good enough, and taking what you think is yours. The cabin was just the latest thing. You've been playing me this whole damn time." Greg shook his head slowly, like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "You're weak, Tom. Always have been. You've never had the guts to make things happen on your own. You've always depended on Kathy and me. You can't handle reality." He said it like a fact, like it was an unchangeable truth. The anger that had been simmering inside me boiled over. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care anymore. I grabbed my drink, slammed it down hard on the table, and stood up so quickly that the chair scraped against the floor. The people around us turned, but I couldn't care less. "You don't get to talk to me like that anymore," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I'm done being your punching bag. You've been manipulating me for years, and I'm not going to let you do it anymore. You may think you've got it all figured out, but I'm done with your bullshit." Greg leaned back in his chair, his face twisting into that familiar smirk. "You'll never understand, Tom. You're just not cut out for this. You never were." I turned and walked out of that bar, feeling like the weight of years of lies and manipulation had finally been lifted off my chest. But that weight was quickly replaced with something else, a fierce, undeniable need for justice. I couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. I couldn't go back to being part of a family that saw me as nothing more than a tool to be used. As I stepped outside, the cool air hit me like a slap in the face, and I took a deep breath. My mind was racing. I had to do something about this. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that Greg wasn't just some father-in-law who didn't like me. No, he was a fraud. He'd been embezzling money from me, from my accounts, for years. It wasn't just about the cabin. It was about a web of lies, and it was time to tear it down. I didn't care anymore if Kathy would hate me for it. I didn't care if this tore the family apart. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I pulled out my phone and called Dave, the investigator. "I need you to dig deeper. I want everything on Greg Whitmore." As the phone rang, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for Kathy's approval. I wasn't doing this for anyone else's. I was doing this for me. The paperwork was filed, the lawsuit officially in motion. As soon as the papers hit the court system, it felt like the weight of the world shifted just a little. It was exhausting, mentally, emotionally, every piece of my life under scrutiny. But at the same time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Real, tangible power. I was no longer sitting quietly in the background, letting my wife's family steamroll me. I was taking control. Kathy was initially supportive, though I could tell something was off. She kept asking me if I was sure about this, if I had thought it through. It was the kind of concern that sounded more like doubt, but I held firm. She'd seen me beaten down by Greg for years. Maybe this was finally my chance to show her I wasn't the weak man they all thought I was. But the cracks started showing. A few weeks into the legal battle, Kathy's tone changed. It wasn't about support anymore. It was about pressure. "You're hurting the family, Tom," she said one evening, sitting across from me at the dinner table. "This is going too far. This is not what we need right now. You need to stop. You're ruining everything." I set my fork down, the words hitting me like a slap. "What do you mean, ruining everything?" My voice was low, but I could feel the anger creeping up my throat. "You think I'm the one ruining things? After everything they've done?" Her face hardened, and her eyes were tired. Tired of me. Tired of fighting. "This vendetta you have? It's pointless. We can't keep dragging this out. You've already done enough damage." I shook my head, incredulous. "Damage? Damage?" I could feel my blood start to boil. "You don't get to talk to me about damage. Not when they've been stealing from me, from us, for years." I stood up from the table, the chair scraping behind me. "If you want me to just sweep this under the rug, Kathy, you're out of your mind." She didn't even flinch. "You're making everything worse, Tom. You're turning this into something it's not." I couldn't stand it. I could see it in her eyes now. This wasn't the woman I thought I married. This was someone who was more concerned with protecting her family's image than what was right. I couldn't keep fighting her, too. "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm, even though my stomach was in knots. "This is bigger than you, than us. This is about making things right." Her eyes darkened, and she stood up too. "You don't get it. This is a family. We're supposed to protect each other, not tear each other apart." I could see the wall coming up between us, and it hurt, deeper than anything I expected. But I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me into backing off. Not this time. I wasn't the one ruining anything. The case started gaining momentum, and the press caught wind of it. It was all over the news. Tom Whitmore, the man suing his in-laws for fraud. The attention was a lot to handle, but honestly, it felt like the universe was finally paying attention. My colleagues at work started rallying behind me. Guys I barely knew were offering support, sending me messages saying they couldn't believe what was going on, that they'd always thought I was one of the good guys. It was a small thing, but it mattered. For once, I wasn't the invisible guy at the office. Kathy started pulling away more. Her concerned wife act was starting to feel more and more like a performance, and it was hard to watch. Every time we spoke, it felt like she was backing Greg, siding with him more than with me. It was like she couldn't bear to admit how deep it all went, how complicit her family was. And then came the bombshell. As Dave dug deeper, the full extent of the Whitmore family's manipulation began to unravel. It wasn't just me they'd been siphoning money from. Greg and Kathy had been skimming from other family members too. Siblings, cousins, people I didn't even know they'd been involved with. There were accounts I hadn't even known existed, all tied up in Greg's shady dealings. The more we uncovered, the more I realized how big this was. What started as a personal betrayal had become something far larger than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person they had ever used. And the more I saw the bigger picture, the more determined I became. But through all of it, the investigation, the mounting evidence, Kathy's growing distance, it became clearer and clearer. I wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. I was fighting for my freedom, for the freedom to not have to answer to them, to anyone. And when this was over, no matter how it turned out, I would never be the same. The final hearing was here, and I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me as I stepped into that courtroom. My suit felt tight around my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly, but I didn't care. I had made it this far, and I wasn't backing down now. I'd spent months looking at evidence, listening to my wife's cold indifference, dealing with every part of this nightmare. But now it was my turn to stand tall. Greg was sitting across from me, his usual air of superiority gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen from him in years: fear. The wealth and influence that had always shielded him were no longer enough. The lies were unraveling right in front of his face, and there was nothing he could do about it. His confident posture, his smug little smirk, had been replaced with the jittery, defensive movements of a man who knew his empire was crumbling. When it was his turn to testify, I could see the sweat on his forehead, the tightness in his jaw. He didn't have that same cocky air anymore. He was squirming under the questions. The lawyer from the prosecution was relentless, digging into every shady deal, every forged signature, every little piece of evidence that had been stacked against him. I sat there, watching, letting the satisfaction build inside me. This was it. After everything, every insult, every lie, I was finally watching him pay the price. Kathy was sitting beside me, her eyes avoiding mine. She'd been quiet throughout the trial, but I could feel her tension. When the time came for her to testify, she refused. She looked at the judge and simply said, "I can't testify against my father." I saw the judge glance at her, eyes narrowing as if he already knew what we all knew. She was complicit. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. When the verdict came down, I could feel the weight lift from my chest. Greg was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. The judge hit him with a hefty fine, and prison time was on the horizon. I'd won. The Whitmore family's empire of lies and manipulation was crumbling right before my eyes. I walked out of that courthouse, not feeling like the man who had walked in. The past few months had torn me down, but they had also rebuilt me into something stronger, something unshakable. I didn't head home, not to the place that had never felt like home to me anymore.